I want to make a promise to you. In fact, I'm going to make 3 promises to you. And whenever you give feedback to CAI and Susan at the end of this, if you choose to do that, I want you to hold me to these 3 promises. Okay. In fact, if I only do 2 out of 3, I want you to say so in the feedback and say, I never really saw him deliver on that second promise or whatever. Okay. So first is maybe an easy one, to acknowledge some of the difficult realities we face today. Even though inflation maybe is getting a bit better, and we did grow, the U.S. economy did grow in the fourth quarter of 2022. I think there's a general sense that we're not out of the woods yet. Layoff notices, we hear about those every day, especially in the tech sector and related sectors. They're almost a bit jarring. So we'll cover some of that. But then also say how, I forget who said it, but somebody once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. I do think we have some opportunities here, right? 3 key choices on how we might exploit those opportunities and even see the opportunities in the first place for how we might respond to that. And then third, to invite you to help create the future we all deserve. I chose those words very carefully, even though I've never met any of you, or well, I've probably met a few of you. How do I know what future we all deserve, right? And who's to say who deserves what? But I firmly believe that we deserve better than what we're getting now. And I think we have more control over what we get, in spite of all the volatility and uncertainty we may be facing, especially when there's big wars or consequential wars going on in the world, and climate-related disasters and all that kind of stuff. So let me dive into the situation. And what I'm going to do is focus only on one small sector, or one small subsector. That's actually a big subsector of an economic sector, and that is semiconductors, the tech sector. Because that's where most of the layoff announcements have been focused over the last 3 or 4 months. And also I happen to have some particular knowledge with the semiconductor subsector. And I think that's reflective, given that it's so central to so many products that we make and depend on all over the world, in peace and in war and everything else. And I think it's indicative of the kinds of challenges we face in general. So, thousands of job cuts and massive amounts of volatility, not just because of wars and supply chain issues and all that, but even economic ups and downs that are more volatile than usual. This particular study was done over a decade ago, saying the fluctuations in that subsector are between -30% and +40%. And I think those fluctuations have gotten more dramatic over the last 11 years, right? So especially if you're in one of those companies, that's got to feel like whiplash. We've all heard about supply chain issues, many of which are COVID related, some of which are not. Global politics, like a war in Europe and conflict elsewhere. And if any of you paid attention to Intel's quarter release last week, it made quite a ripple in the financial news. I think one analyst called it atrocious. I heard some analysts even say things much more strongly worded than atrocious. So there's definitely something going on that is creating a lot of consternation among all of us, creating a lot more uncertainty for many of us. And I think especially given that CAI is focused on the tech sector, specifically IT, I think, you probably are all feeling this, or if you're not feeling it, you may well feel it soon. And so my hope is to prepare all of you not just to face it with courage, but also to take advantage. Not undue advantage, not in a way that might hurt other people or whatever, but it might help your organization thrive. That's that kind of advantage I'm hoping to walk through with you all today. And I want to start with, this might seem a little odd, why are we talking about tribal instincts? I think this is really important because, as with most solutions that we humans are challenged with coming up with, we are often limited by our own mindset. And in this case, sometimes when things get tough, when things get uncertain, we look to sort of hunker down and tighten our circle of trust and also look for other people outside of that circle to blame for stuff. And I believe that's ultimately very self-limiting. So I wanted to acknowledge we all have such instincts. I'm not asking anyone to turn the instincts off. That's impossible. But I do want to point to one of my favorite examples from history. Abraham Lincoln, right toward the end of toward the end of the Civil War, or maybe just after the Civil War, might have been his Gettysburg Address, actually. He said, following these instincts is normal, but if we do so without the better angels of our nature, we lose the ability to build relationships with other groups different from our own. Think about that, lose the ability, right? Not just temporarily fail to connect with people that might be good to connect with, but we actually have less of an ability to do it at all. So I thought it might be fun to even just read the larger quote. I believe this was the Gettysburg Address, but now I'm starting to question that. Maybe somebody can correct me in the chat or Q&A if it's not. He writes, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature." So what I take from that is he was essentially asking the American citizenry who had already hardened into, brutal, bloody warfare, not just factionalism, but really hard against each other with genuine suffering and things that impacted, everyone's family and community across the country. He basically still said, in spite of all that, inform your instincts with the broader we. Right, redefine we with a broader circle, even if it can feel a bit risky that we don't know some of those people. How can I trust some of those people? I'm going to hunker down and only hang around with the people I know I trust. That tends to be the us versus them kind of thinking and looking for scapegoats and all that. And by the way, as inspiring as Lincoln's quote is, at least to me, he was unsuccessful, right? He was not getting people to go by the better angels of their nature. He lost that battle. It took quite a few more decades after his death before that happened. So I'm not suggesting that all of today's challenges impact us Americans as hard as the Civil War did. I am saying that no matter what the challenge, this can be quite difficult to choose the broader we. But I believe that's where it all starts. If we don't choose the broader we get stuck in this sort of blame game, and those other people over there must be evil, and all the us versus them thinking. So when I promised you that I'd offer up 3 choices that you can each one of us has the autonomy to make. The first one is choose the broader we. If you shrink this down to just your organizations, even if you have a very cohesive culture and generally people trust each other, and your company, is better than most on those sorts of things, I think starting off with the broader we really can help a lot. Even little things like starting off questions with how come you made this mistake, or how come you allowed some bad thing to happen, or how come you didn't see some of the economic, depressing economic signals coming. Even that, how phrasing something as how come you is very different than how might we, right? And the how might we is the subtitle of this presentation. So I think just training yourself to start questions with how might we, even if it's very sharp and tough, like how might we make sure that bad thing never happens again? Right? How might we make sure that nobody in this company ever makes that terrible mistake again? Still, this choosing the broader we and starting things with how might we really kind of helps train your brain to choose the broader we. Okay, so that's number 1. So I also want to say, again, it's not the semiconductor market is a great example of this, but I believe these sorts of examples exist everywhere. That yes, there's all this volatility that you can read about in the press all the time, but check out this study that McKinsey did like about a year and a half ago, I think, coming up on 2 years ago. This, if you can't read the small details here, it's basically saying that in the 40 years since the semiconductor industry began, we've gotten up to almost $600 billion in market size, or industry size. And this McKinsey study thinks it will almost double just in the next 7 years, or 9 years since they did the study in 2021. So think about that. As big and important as it is today, it will almost double from what it is just a couple of years ago. So there's massive amounts of opportunity still. And I don't believe that things will necessarily become less volatile and more predictable. I just think there's dramatic upside. And so we have to find a way to manage all that volatility while still keeping our eyes on the prize with what the upside is. So essentially, if you put that challenge in a nutshell, it's how might we, right? I even try to coach myself to start questions with that as often as I can. How might we take full advantage of our opportunity where we have it without suffering any whiplash from the market's volatility? It's not that the volatility will suddenly be past, the storm will pass, everything will be more predictable again someday, just ride it out. No, I think it's here to stay and maybe get worse, but it doesn't mean we have to make ourselves victims of it. And in fact, I'd go even further and say, you cannot thrive. No large organization has ever been able to thrive without having the stable foundation of what I would call, becoming a sanctuary of stability. So how might we help our organizations become sanctuaries of stability? That's the somewhat odd title of today's presentation compared to the typical program management, risk management, portfolio governance type of topics. But I think it's basically the most crucial thing we can do as project management leaders in our organizations. And I'll explain a bit more what I mean by that. In fact, I'll even go further and say, I think I have some suggestions to answer the how might we that hopefully will be useful for you all. So it starts with a few core assertions. Again, this may not always be true 100% of the time, but I think the pattern is probably 90% plus, maybe even higher, closer to 100, that every organization's or almost every organization's core challenge is fundamentally one of flow, that the value delivery cadence needs to speed up. And let me throw an example here real quick that hopefully makes it clear to people. When we talk about, I'm sure that maybe all of us at some point in our careers have felt like perhaps we're not being paid as highly as we should be, given the contributions we're making to our organizations, and that we deserve a raise. And what we're saying there is, we think that the flow rate of salary dollars into my bank account should be higher. Okay, that might be an odd or awkward way to say it, but that's what we're saying. We're saying we want a greater flow of income. Well, companies are saying the same thing too, of course. If you're wondering why executives are always demanding, more results sooner, and sometimes it even seems arbitrary or capricious. Well, what they're all under pressure from stockholders, owners, whatever, is we want to get more, and it's not because we're greedy; it's because we want to thrive. I mean, maybe there's some greed here and there too, but the best way to thrive, if you're a commercial and for-profit entity, is to boost your income, just like all of us as individuals might think we deserve. So what we're saying is, well, in order to earn more money, you have to deliver more value, unless your customers are just stupid and buying things that aren't valuable from you, which doesn't tend to last very long if you can do it at all. So if we can say, well, if flow is so important and helping our organizations thrive depends on improving the flow of value, well, then how do we deal with that? How do we make that happen? And so I want to start with the physics of flow, or principles of flow that come from the natural world that absolutely apply in our project portfolio contexts to achieve both stability and maximum flow at the same time. Because again, we can't achieve one without the other. Specifically, we can't achieve flow without stability. Indeed, again, this is my assertion. You're all valid. You're all welcome to disagree or challenge it. In fact, it might make for a fun Q&A if you do. But you got to have stability in order to have maximum flow. And organizations that risk destabilizing themselves, right, through excessive layoffs Not just trimming the fat or, hey, we overhired just a bit last quarter. I guess we got to right size somewhat if things are going, less optimistic than we had imagined. Some of those corrections maybe are necessary, and I think some of that is what we're seeing in the tech sector. But I think much more than that, we're seeing this we're allowing the instability in the marketplace to cause us to make decisions that are actually making the whiplash worse. And destabilizing things so that we're actually getting much worse flow. And that could be a very dangerous, vicious cycle, right? Because if we destabilize things and we deliver less value, well, then we're going to be less profitable. And then we're going to have another round of layoffs, and that'll destabilize things. That'll destabilize things further, and down the drain we go, as they say. So I think I'm going to show you a set of tactics that help protect the organization's stability, even in times of downturn, assuming it's temporary downturn. I don't think it would help, Blockbuster prevent itself from going into business if the market is fundamentally changing for, the value it's trying to provide. But for those of us who are companies that are not just becoming dinosaurs, but actually have real relevance in the world and deliver real value, and will continue to do so well into the future, don't get in your own way, right? So I thought I'd share a couple principles of flow that you don't have to be a fluid dynamics engineer or any sort of flow expert. You don't have to be a lean expert or a theory of constraints expert or anything like that. With just a few basic conceptual underpinnings that can help you make better decisions. So again, I'll start with what does the natural world, what does physics tell us about maximizing flow through a bottleneck? And by the way, hopefully all of you can see the relevance to project portfolio context already, that of course we feel like we see bottlenecks all over the place, right? We get held up and stuck in places all the time. And if we could only make things flow better through those bottlenecks, boy, would results be better. Our value delivery cadence would be higher. We could thrive more. So the picture I'm showing, this is from a YouTube video that I'll share the link for in just a sec, if you all want to spend 6 minutes watching it yourself someday. But the fundamental concept here is, if you just flip the bottle upside down and allow gravity to do its thing, you will get flow. And you'll get a flow rate of about a gallon per minute of water coming out of that bottle through the bottleneck. But as you can also see, there's quite a bit of chaos in that bottle. A lot of fighting between all the water molecules and air molecules over that scarce bottleneck resource, right? So you probably have seen such resource conflicts in your own organizations. And it leads to, in this case, the worst kind of flow pattern, which I'll call stop-start flow, right? So in order for the water to drain out and flow out, which is what we want, we get a little bit of water out, but only if a little bit of air comes in, and then that gets interrupted for a little more water to come out and a little more air to come in. And it's just, you can see all this activity, all these collisions among all the molecules, and not a whole lot of flow. So if I were to challenge you all to improve the flow through that bottleneck without altering the bottle in any way, without altering the fundamental properties of gravity, here on Earth, say at sea level or whatever, same liquid, it's water, right? Same everything. Some people say, well, if you tip the bottle just so, you could probably balance how that bottleneck resource is allocated between air coming in and water coming out, and you get better flow. I like that. And I think similarly is this vortex that I'm showing under letter B. And indeed, it takes a little bit of effort to get that vortex going. But once it's going, you have pretty good alignment among all the molecules now, and a pretty good allocation of that scarce bottleneck resource. So it's perhaps not surprising that we can double our flow with that one simple management change. If I were to challenge you all to come up with an even better way to do it, again, without altering the bottle, like drilling a hole through the bottom or anything like that, you might come up with this idea. And indeed, that's an even better allocation of that bottleneck resource. It's more fixed and stable. And as you can see, it's less effort just to get going and to keep going. And the molecules are way more stable. and the flow rate doubles. And so again, my assertion before that maximum flow depends on stability, you can see it very visibly here, right? We have a much more stable environment. Everything is set up to drive our objective, which is maximum flow, right? And if you can imagine water leaving the bottle as equivalent to our companies earning more profit, or if you're in a nonprofit or public sector organization, delivering way better impact for your constituents for every dollar you're given. So the notion here is with just one simple management change, and in the case of letter C with the straw, a tiny bit of additional resourcing, you can double or even quadruple your flow rate. And I think a lot of us, again, back to the mindset thing of, the first coaching I've given is choose the broader we. Well, another one here is imagine what's possible. We're often taught to think, things are so hard to improve around here. The best we could hope for is maybe a 10 or 15% improvement. Certainly don't hold me accountable for doubling or quadrupling anything. That would be ridiculously unrealistic. Well, maybe not. And maybe we shouldn't hold people to it. We should just encourage people to come up with good ideas that might help us achieve it, right? And we're not guaranteed that the vortex experiment would have succeeded. Luckily, it did. Same with the straw, right? Let's try it out and see if it actually helps anything. And if it doesn't, let's try something else. But again, the point here is driving up performance can be very simple. It doesn't require, improving everything all over the place. A couple small changes. In this case, right, it's a very focused change that attacks the problem of how do we manage that bottleneck resource. And if we do really well on the bottleneck resource, well, then the whole system will improve. We don't even have to worry about what's going on in places other than the bottleneck. So even the most complex, large-scale situations could be managed and controlled very simply in a stable way. So when I first heard of these concepts, and by the way, I was well past the 20-year mark in my career when I learned of some of this, I was, of course, quite skeptical, and I encourage that kind of healthy skepticism from all of you as well. So yeah, of course, your organization is far more complex. I imagine, especially if you're bigger than a startup or a very small scale up, it's probably far more complex. So it's not that the complexity itself disappears, it's that our ability to manage through it and achieve higher performance thresholds becomes simpler, right? And so the first challenge with this, in my mind, is no single person, not even the CEO or the top executive, who may well have risen through the ranks and touched every facet of the organization and knows how all these different areas work and how the whole system works. Surely they must kind of have the best purview, the best vantage point to see what the end-to-end system for value delivery is and how it works. But I don't think even the system owner always knows. Some of our organizations are so large and changing constantly that it's simply not possible for a single human being to really understand how it all works. So I liken it, many of us have seen this analogy where if we didn't have eyesight and we're touching a different part of an elephant, we obviously wouldn't be able to sense what that entire elephant is really like. And so as examples here, that guy on the ground hugging the leg of the elephant might imagine that that's a tree trunk, right? And of course, somebody holding the tail might imagine that's a rope, right? Somebody holding the trunk might imagine it's more like a snake. You get the idea. But if we actually could put all of their diverse perspectives together, we'd probably start to create a picture that looks a bit more like the actual elephant. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that we're all blind in our organizations. I'm just saying sometimes it's impossible for anyone to legitimately claim they can see the whole thing, right? It's almost like a shape-shifting elephant, a very large, complex shape-shifting elephant, if you will. So everyone from their own area of the organization, what they're sensing is just a piece, of course, and we can't put all the pieces together until we talk to each other and invite diverse perspectives and begin to understand what's really going on across this entire ecosystem. So in order to improve it, we have to understand it better. In fact, even if I were to ask you, what is the bottleneck for this whole complex organization? It won't be as simple as just looking at a bottle of water and seeing it quite visibly, right? Often we don't even know. And it takes a bunch of diverse perspectives to figure out what is the biggest bottleneck because wherever that is, that's where we want to figure out either the vortex or where to insert the straw, or how to improve that better. Okay, great. So that's complexity. In summary, I would basically just say all of that was leading up to choice number 2, right? Which is never stop asking the question, how might we improve our system for value delivery? Right? How might we get more water to flow out of the bottle? I think so often organizations have lost the ability to ask that because we're all so focused on our little piece of it and achieving our own individual KPIs or OKRs, or even just KRs. That you can't hold me accountable for anything other than my piece. I don't run the whole system. I just got to deliver more sales or get more projects done or whatever. But that's why the how might we is so important. You're asking other people who are touching different parts of the elephant to think about how to solve this from their point of view, right? And again, if we have all those diverse perspectives channeled into a group understanding of our system as that system morphs and changes, now we have a fighting chance. By the way, again, you don't have to come up with this all from scratch. I certainly was able to stand on the shoulders of some giants. If you haven't heard of the theory of constraints with the late, great Dr. Goldratt, that's not a bad place to start. By the way, yes, there are some things, because the book's so old, it's almost 40 years old. There's some things in the book that are definitely going to come across as dated, but I assure you the core concepts apply. And an even older book with even more dated references here and there, still the same essential concepts come across. And so I actually didn't even discover this book, High Output Management, until last year. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, he actually came up with the theory of constraints before Dr. Goldratt did, like 1 year before. And by the way, in both of these books, and many that have been written since 40 years ago, there's this concept of understanding the power of the system constraint or the bottleneck, or the set of resources that might form the bottleneck, or whatever the natural choke point might be in your organization's system for value delivery. It basically says, start there. Once you know what that is, everything becomes much simpler and more stable. So choice number 3 is never stop growing your flow driver skills. And again, if that sounds sort of vague and or just awkward or odd to you, again, when you think of driving flow, think of driving more salary dollars into your bank account, right? Helping the organization drive more profit dollars into its coffers, helping your public sector organization drive more impact to its constituents. All of those are the things that flow driver skills help you achieve. By the way, even though I consider myself a flow expert and I'm a student of Andy Grove and Dr. Goldratt and Deming and other people that have come before us, I still consider myself just at the very beginning of my journey on becoming a better flow driver. But I think it's one of those things that is a lifelong thing. It never ends. You can always be better, even if you think you're an expert. And of course, if you've never even pondered this before and it never appeared in the PMP exam and all that stuff, or in the Scrum Master course, well, then all the better, right? You can now separate yourself from your peers by becoming really good at this. I wanted to give an example of this in action. In fact, I wanted to start before I go into this story to say what Dr. Goldratt and what Andy Grove, right, the former CEO of Intel, say about this. So on page 2 of Andy Grove's book, which kind of blew my mind when I read it, he writes, the first thing we must do is pin down the step in the flow that will determine the overall shape of our operation, which we'll call the limiting step. Very interesting. Goldratt, incidentally, called this the system constraint. I like to call it, and I'm not alone, I like to call it the control point, because constraint sounds negative, like we're impeded or prevented from achieving something we want. Limiting step similarly sounds limiting. I like the term control point because, again, it's the way to simplify how we manage a complex system. Right, so I think it's more helpful. So I want to tell this blue light story to give an example of how to apply this in practice, how a real world organization applied this in practice. Right, so first step is identify the control point, right? The CEO of this organization, before they met a colleague of mine, that this story was based on his experience. He said, look, I've tried everything. I've tried, ISO 9000 quality improvement stuff. I've tried lean manufacturing. They're a manufacturer. I've tried quality circles. I've tried, autonomy and empowerment training. I've tried all this stuff and nothing improves. In fact, it's worse. Because we're so successful and there's so much demand for our product, we keep growing to try and meet it. But as we grow, it seems our profit growth doesn't scale as well. So the profit margins are going down. So if we keep on that trajectory, we'll keep growing and growing, get more and more revenue, but our profit will get smaller and smaller. That's, of course, not what we want. So frustrated, he brought in this colleague of mine. Colleague said, well, what is your control point? And they thought about this for a while and looked at things. Said, okay, the most critical skill area might be it. That's a group of highly specialized welders. This was a highly specialized manufacturer of heavy-duty truck bumpers, interestingly enough. So the most complex welds, even if you're a master welder, you've never done it with our specific products, with our specific requirements to achieve the specs that our customers demand, for quality. It takes 5 years to grow these guys. Not everyone even gets there. So that's probably, if I had to guess or trust my intuition, it would probably be, that's the bottleneck resource or the control point. Okay, great. So step 2. By the way, for those of you that do know a bit about theory of constraints, I'm more or less offering you here a version of the 5 focusing steps. If you're not familiar with that, just go along with me here. I think it'll make sense. So brainstorm simple changes. If indeed the master welders are the bottleneck, right? They are the control point. Well, then that information alone could be very helpful. Now, if I'm a master welder, I can do a better job of prioritizing my time. I can say, well, I should go to that meeting. It's an important meeting. They say they need me there. But is it more important than me continuing to work? Because if I stop working, even for an hour, then the whole system will produce less. And if the whole system produces less, then our ability to drive up the flow of profit dollars goes down. So that's great information. Let's see it. And they even came up with an obvious simplifying indicator or good signal, right? And it was quite simple. Are our welding torches on? Right? If you've ever seen a welding torch, it kind of has that blue light coming out of it. So it's basically the more blue light we see, the more often from those 5 or 6 master welders, the more likely our system is speeding up. So that was a transformative, signal, and trying to follow that signal and make better choices on the time for those specific resources. But let's not stop there. Let's actually make a system out of it. Let's organize our system around it. So step 3 is shifting the resources to maximize the blue light. As an example, well, I write it here, actually, a full kit manager is assigned to each one of the welders. If you're not familiar with that term full kit, it's just giving each welder all the inputs they need with the right quality level to make sure that when they go to work, they can knock out their tasks one at a time with total focus and minimal rework or minimal defects. Right, so the master welder, you no longer go down to purchasing to figure out why the supplier hasn't sent the part yet. You no longer unwrap the raw materials parts and set them up at your workstation. You no longer go to meetings that aren't about how to drive up your blue light, right? And the system will do those things for you, right? We'll refocus you on the things that drive blue light time and take away things that detract from it. That's almost always the biggest step, right? Because the entire organization is now applying the knowledge of the bottleneck resource and aligning to it. And then here's where it gets interesting in times of tumult or times of instability, right? Where you have dramatic fluctuations in demand or short-term demand anyway. So they had this master apprentice program because, again, it takes years to grow these master welders, and the master welders are told to maximize blue light time. But well, then who's going to train the next generation of master welders? Who's going to do the apprenticing of the junior guys? Well, when there are short-term downward fluctuations in demand, we can ratchet down the blue light time accordingly and then spend that extra capacity on the downturn to mentor our people for the next upturn. You might think of this as a slingshot approach, right? You kind of pull back in order to really spring forward. Notice this is very different from, oh my gosh, our revenue forecasts are dramatically downward. We need to they're down by 30%. I guess we need to do a 30% staff reduction across the board. No, protect the capacity you have. If you really believe that there's an upswing coming, that the long-term demand is strong, kind of like when I showed in the semiconductor example, let's be ready for the next upturn, which will inevitably come. Okay, and boy, will we be ready, because we'll have a new mini army of highly trained resources ready to ramp up and take advantage of that upturn. And by the way, in this example, within 3 months, the throughput of their entire factory doubled. Given that their only additional costs were raw materials resources, that resulted in a tripling of profit. So this can be quite powerful, just like the bottleneck, the actual water in the bottles example, right? So often when I talk to some of my colleagues that know about the story, say, well, what are you doing to maximize your blue light? Maybe you can kind of, use that as shorthand in your own organizations. Tell this story and then talk about what is the blue light signal that we want to maximize here. I wanted to give more of a project-centric example for those of you, given that many of you are project managers or working in a project context or product development context, same thing. Basically, if you're working like 3 simultaneous projects at once, the different colors are just different areas of specialization. This could be like a design, build, test kind of thing. For example, right, blue, green, orange. If we're working multiple projects at once, we of course have to shift our focus multiple times, right? We have to jump around. Indeed, that's why Scrum calls for dedicated teams, although that could be, there's some challenges with dedicated teams as well. But if we have this sort of handoff, this sort of flow, and we're trying to juggle multiple things at once, we can get a flow rate of 3 projects done in 17 weeks. I liken this to exhibit A of our water bottle, where we'll get flow, but the collisions occur with resources bouncing around, often bumping into each other, right? Priorities not being super clear, all stakeholders screaming at us for progress across multiple initiatives. And if we were to impose a better flow rate organized around a control point, we would get something more like this picture. And you'll note even the last project to start here would finish 4 weeks earlier than it does under the simultaneous approach. Oh, by the way, the 2 weeks time that the blue resource up above, resource A, needs to get their thing done is still 2 weeks down below. I argue it's probably much faster than 2 weeks because we're more focused. I think we've all felt that and seen examples of that, right? When we get really focused, we can go much faster. Such that without adding any additional resources, we can get a 4th project done in the same time frame. And quite counterintuitively, only 1/3 of our resource pool is fully busy. Or put another way, 2/3 of our resource pool is 1/3 idle. So that's really strange when we're thinking about, no, we got to keep everyone busy and maximize utilization, and only then will we produce more results. Or worse, if our executives challenge us, hey, what would it take to get a 4th project done? The answer almost always is, give me more resources. And not just give me more resource B, which is all I would need under the scenario below, right? If I wanted to get a 5th project in there within 17 weeks, I would ask for more resource B, a lot, and that's it, right? More of my control point resource, that's all I would need. Up above, we have no visibility into control points or anything like that. It's more of a chaotic, scattered system with lots of collisions. And so just give me more of everything is the only way I know how to boost throughput there. So quite interesting. And oh, by the way, there's a game that I didn't design, but I did convert the in-person game to an online game once the pandemic hit, so that online you can run the same scenario. I won't go into a bunch of details on the game and how it works, but it's suffice it to say the pattern below is essentially the simultaneous approach where we start all projects at roughly the same time and finish them all at roughly the same time. But you can see the flow improvement when we make the one rule change to say, you know what? Resource A, finish your task on project 1 before you start your task on project 2. Don't bounce around. And with that one rule change, you can see how much faster and more predictable and stable, right? You now have a sanctuary of stability, such that if I introduce project 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., as long as you have clear priorities on what order to start them in, you can keep going on this nice accelerated pattern with stability, without overtime, without stressing people out, all that stuff. And if you were to flow this all the way through with more projects, you would see you could actually get 9 or possibly even 10 projects done in the same time as you got 3 done down below. So again, in practice, it's not just a 30 or 40% improvement, but actually a 3x improvement. So tripling the throughput with one simple change. Again, back quite similar to our water bottle example where we doubled or quadrupled the throughput there. By the way, this game is, it runs in a mural board, M-U-R-A-L, if you're not familiar. And so what Mural allows is not only a free environment to people that call themselves consultants or coaches like me, and that once you have your environment set up, I can actually transfer my game over to you at no cost to you. And so I'm happy to do that as an offer to everyone here and whoever you want to extend the offer to beyond here. And I won't charge anyone anything. And as long as we can honor my schedule constraints, I'll even book time with you to coach you on how to facilitate it at no cost. So why would I do that? Well, the reason is because there is a selfish reason here. I've found that the best change agents in any organizational context are not external consultants. They're internal change drivers, right? Internal change agents, internal leaders, not necessarily an executive leader. So for somebody on the inside to be kind of promoting this and coaching this, and then often if you get any traction at all, you might need help from someone like me. And hopefully you will think about what a nice guy I was to lend you all the stuff for free, and maybe I can come in and help in the way that I make my living. But if that never leads to that, you just get good insights and learnings and something you tuck in your back pocket for your future, and you never need me at all, I'm of course fine with that too, because you're going to achieve great things. Cool. So some additional coaching on how might we? These are just sort of questions to train yourself to ask that can really promote the kind of culture here, right? How do we even know what our control point is? How do we come to a shared understanding of what it is, right? Because again, we're all touching parts of the elephant. We don't all have the full picture. How might we change things to maximize blue light time, right? Especially when short-term demand is high and we really want to exploit it. How might we protect the control point? And you can see some of these other examples here. So I'll kind of leave the slide here just to kind of give you a flavor, but I'm sure you have other questions you'd like to come up with that start with how might we, that could really challenge the thinking in a very collaborative and in a way that invites diverse perspectives to help the organization thrive. So with that, I will go to my call for action, and that'll leave us plenty of time for Q&A. The call to action is simply to make the 3 choices. So we have total control of that, right? Choose the broader we, never stop asking that how might we question, never stop growing your flow driver skills. Those are all choices you can make individually. You don't need to wait for permission for your executives or from your executives. You can just do all 3. Awesome. If you're looking for where to start, I've mentioned the 2 books up top, even though they're 39 and 40 years old now. The concepts still apply. The flow principles are the same, just like gravity hasn't changed, right? And I wrote a book, let's see, coming up on 9 years ago. Can't believe it. So even the 9 years it's less dated than the books from the 80s, I hope. But again, there's core principles there that apply to this day, and I'll stand behind them. Happy to chat. Again, I won't put you on the meter and charge you money just to talk. As you can probably tell, I love talking about this stuff. All these things are changes I'm prepared to take on and ask who's with me. But more importantly, I encourage you to repeat those words. If you see a change in your organization that you'd really like to help drive, lead by example. Don't say, oh, well, somebody around here should do this. Or how come our stupid executives don't understand they should do this? It's much more effective to say, I'm prepared to take on the change, even though I really don't know the path. We'll have to grope our way through the dark a little bit here, but we've got some core principles to base things on. And by the way, the PDF version of the slide deck will be available for everybody. Susan and our friends at CAI will make those available to anyone who's interested. But yeah, to just say, hey guys, I think this is important to help our organization thrive and create a sanctuary of stability in times of tumult. Who's with me? And even if you get nobody to take you up on it, I guarantee you'll start some people thinking like, yeah, what might we do to change our status quo? And by the way, I will talk to anyone, work with anyone, challenge anyone, if it helps me do what's my passion, right? Give you the chance to create sanctuaries of stability in times of tumult. And by the way, having an external person come in sometimes is easier to challenge your executives. It's sometimes dangerous to challenge them. Inside of an organization, it could be a career-limiting move to challenge them too openly or too harshly. But I don't have that same limitation. I don't, they can't. So I've done like free, lunch and learns with executives, or just a free conference call with an executive for 30 minutes or an hour. And sometimes, throw a pie in their face or challenge them in some way that forces them, or hopefully causes them to reflect a bit and see what more they might do. So always happy to kind of serve as the instigator, if you will, to try and stir things up.
Well, Mike, we thank you very, very much for joining us today. We thank all of you attendees for joining us. We hope you can join us for some future webinars. So with that, we'll wrap things up. So Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan. It's fun as always. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.